Hi, I'm Hills Walton, and welcome along to the Digital Culture Ideas Show. Today, I interview Lynne Jeffery, who's the Managing Director New Zealand of NextGen Group. Lynne shares with us some really great leadership tips all throughout the episode. We talk about how sometimes you just need to take hold of opportunities and think to yourself, what was the worst that could go wrong? And she also talks about an experience of leadership that didn't go so well and some of the things she learned from that. It's always really important to learn from when things don't go wrong as well as when they do. She also shares some of the top leadership tips from the Leadership Forum that NextGen run this year. And they had some international speakers ranging from John Cree to Stan Slatt, and some amazing tips and guidance there. So this is a leadership jam-packed episode. You'll be lots of tips and tricks to put in your back pocket and take with you. So I hope you enjoy it. Lynne, welcome. How are you and what's been going on?
Kia ora, Hilary, and oh gosh, I'm excited.
And just so to give our listeners a bit of context, can you just whip through like a little bit about yourself and what you do, and also in particular how you got into technology?
Cool, right. Well, look, I was born and bred in Wellington. Currently living in Auckland, but yeah, Wellington was where I grew up. Came from a very sporting family. My dad used to play rugby, athletics and golf. Mum, she was a tennis and badminton player. My older brother got me into skiing when I was about 9, so that was awesome. But look, yeah, grew up playing tennis and badminton. At one point in my early teens, I was playing so many different sports: tennis, badminton, cricket, water polo, underwater hockey, netball, squash. Anyway, lots that I was playing. But so yeah, definitely a very sporting family and very keen on sports and exercise. And yeah, I first started representing Wellington at badminton when I was 12. So by my late teens and early 20s, like I was representing Wellington in the senior first division, travelling to tournaments all over the country, and then in my summertime we had to do off-season training. I was doing triathlons. So yeah, no, I love working out. I first joined Les Mills Gym in Wellington when I was 17. So yeah, absolutely love the gym and still do. And so yeah, sports and physical activity, always a big part of my life growing up. And growing up in the eastern suburbs of Wellington as well, the beaches were also a regular go-to for my friends and me as well. So yeah, I had loved where we lived, and it was all good fun. And yeah, but gosh, how did I end up in tech? That's a really good question. Because yeah, it's interesting. I guess always growing up, I wanted to be a police officer, and loved all that physical activity. And frankly, I think it was probably just that. I think they do 6 months of physical training to become a police cadet or whatever. But into my teens, I was considering actually becoming a pilot. I loved science and maths at school, but I guess when it came down to the time to choose if I go to university or apply to the police college or the Air Force, my dad, he's an accountant, he'd say, well, if you're going to university, don't waste your time on a degree that won't get you a job at the end of it. So I was kind of like, oh, okay, well, I better look at see what jobs are out there and what's available. And my brother and sister, they were both in technology. So when I was looking at the job pages one day, and I saw that tech jobs seemed to be in high demand. And like, I always wanted to go traveling. So getting a job at the end of my degree was hugely important to that goal, to save all that money that you needed to be able to head off on your OE and be granted an entry into London. But yeah, so that all really drove my decision to do a science degree. I decided on majoring in computer science as well. So that I went to Victoria University in Wellington. So that was pretty much what drove my my interest in progressing with that computer sance degree. But,
yeah. So had you shown some interest in tech prior to that? Like, were you one of the early people to get a computer or anything like that? Or was it more you discovered it when you were there?
Just discovered it when I was there, really. I didn't really know how to... how to even turn on a computer. Don't get me wrong, I love school, but we didn't have technology classes at school.
No.
It just wasn't a thing. I mean, I did typing at school, and I have to say, it was one of the best skills I learned. Yeah. But it was really interesting because I absolutely loved school. Went to a very multicultural school. It was an all-girls college. I had a big group of friends, and I was even head girl in my last year there. But university was on a whole different plane. I really didn't enjoy it. All of my friends were doing commerce or law. They, to be fair, all my non-science subjects were usually commerce related, but look, I stuck with computer science. I'm also a very determined person, and I start something, I'm determined to finish it. And at the end of it, you could count the number of women in my year who graduated with a computer science degree on one hand. So look, it was a challenge, but I stuck with it, and finished that. And my first job was a graduate placement in the IT division at Shell New Zealand. I was cutting some code there to support their. It was a retail sales and inventory system that I was supporting, and spent 3 years there, basically utilising my skills as a developer. I think back then it was called analyst/programmer. Then London called, and both my brother and sister were living there at the time too. So cashed in the savings and went to London for 2, maybe 4 years. And 13 years later, I finally moved back to New Zealand with my British husband. So, that was quite exciting. But I guess in London, I was fortunate enough to land a job, and it was with a really cool, disruptive and competing telco to British Telecom. And I actually joined their marketing team, and I joined as a temp. I was employed by an organisation called Office Angels, which therein tells you a few things. But I joined. They couldn't afford to pay developer hourly rates, and I didn't want to live, or I didn't want to work out, 90 minutes commuting distance from London. So this job was right in the city centre, not far from the West End, and joined their marketing team to set up a marketing information system for them. So that was quite exciting. I later wrote a user interface to make sure that they could run their own reports, and then moved into a sales role for their wholesale division. So that was kind of a growing part of the business, and was certainly quite a change. But the beauty of working for Mercury Communications, as it was called at the time, the size of the organisation and the opportunities that presented itself from there to move into different roles was incredible. I was there for just over 10 years, and I absolutely loved it, and the opportunities were incredible. And I just basically moved around from role to role within the overall business of working for a telco. So that was quite exciting, and expanded my skills and experience into the tech sector even further.
Yeah, and through the different roles, which has probably really set you up for your current role. So I know that you've done the odd blog, and there's one that I did find where you talk about, being offered that CEO role for NextGen, and what some of your thoughts about, when opportunity knocks, what you should do about that. So can you talk a bit about that, in particular the advice you give people when they're weighing up different opportunities?
Yeah, no, sure. Look, making the most of opportunities, something I've lived by all my life, whether it's consciously or unconsciously. I'm naturally quite a positive person, but if you look at it from an unconscious perspective, example I think back to when my science teacher was encouraging me to join the school underwater hockey team. I was like, underwater what? And I was thinking, oh, well, I can swim. You're wearing these things called fins and a mask, and, I'll give it a go. I shouldn't drown, But yeah, I joined the team, and then probably about a year or so after that, our team went on to win the national school champs. So yeah, who knew? But yeah, I guess from a more conscious perspective, I guess when I was at Mercury Communications, the telco I worked for in London, when I was offered this account manager role in the wholesale division, I really had to decide, okay, well, that was a career change for me. Did I want to step out of designing systems and cutting code into effectively sales? And look, I love travel, and this role was going to allow me to travel to all sorts of places around Europe, Middle East, and Africa. But stopping that software development work meant that I might not be able to get back into it. So, and if I did, I'd be behind everyone else. But did I really want to do this? So, weighed up the options and just thought, well, look, if I don't like it, and I want to go back to developing, then I can always do some refresher training or something. And hey, look, if it works out, then onwards and upwards. So I went for the new role and got it, and haven't really looked back. So I guess from a personal perspective, I'm very pragmatic when it comes to assessing opportunities and weighing up those positives and negatives. And usually when the positives outweigh the negatives, or the negatives can be managed, or they're not really that negative, then it's usually a no-brainer for me. But if it's even, and the reasons for taking the opportunity kind of align with my personal values in terms of if it's even between the positives and the negatives, but the reasons for taking the role align with my personal values or goals, then that's usually a no-brainer as well. But look, it can be a really tough decision when it steps me out of my comfort zone. Like, when I was offered this role at NextGen to run the NextGen New Zealand business, but freaked me out a bit. I did a lot of navel gazing and did a lot of assessments and weighing up the pros and cons, and I was quite happy where I was in my current job. And but yeah, my advice in these situations is to really back yourself, and if you truly believe it's right for you, or it's the right next step for you, then then go for it. But it was certainly a difficult decision, but I haven't looked back. And I think back to, like, I was probably 19 or 20, and I was given some advice by a colleague and very early in my career, when faced with decisions or faced with opportunities, he's kind of like, well, hey, what's the worst that can happen? And when it boils down to it, the worst is normally not so bad. And that's really given me the confidence to give things a go. And if it doesn't work out, then I just put it down to experience and go from there. Really.
Yeah, move on. 100%. That's so cool. And because often things don't go to plan, do they, in life? It might be jobs ending unexpectedly, or projects don't go well, or you haven't been able to influence stakeholders in the right way. Is there a time that's happened to you, and how have you kind of, first of all, picked yourself back up after that, but then also led other people through it?
Yeah, so look, that's a great question. And having had most of my experience in the last 2 decades has been in sales, I guess the examples that first come to mind there are really when you've, put all the blood, sweat and tears into responding to an RFP or a tender or something, and you've got down to the final stages, and then come second, and you're like, oh, what? It's like, you kind of, it's just that downer that's like, why? And a couple of my early career times where I experienced that, I'll be honest with you, there were tears and everything. It's all very emotional. But look, I've learned to understand in the last, in my career, that these things happen. And look, I always ensure that, whether we've won or not, if we've won the deal or we've not won it, that we at least do reviews with the customer and make sure we find out why. So, what were we good at, and what they didn't align with, or what we didn't hit the mark with ourselves, and any advice for moving forward. And that kind of that sort of continuous improvement in terms of, okay, well, these things we were really good at, we'll take, continue doing those, and take all those learnings on board about things that we didn't hit the mark with or we needed to improve on, and just make sure that next time they're incorporated into the next tender or RFP. And it's one of the best things you can do on that whole continuous improvement piece. But I guess at the end of the day, if you've done your very best and it really didn't work out, then you can move forward taking comfort in that, and exactly that, knowing that you've put your best foot forward, really. And I guess thinking about an example, this isn't actually an RFP or tender example, actually. It's I worked for a company a few years ago where a software company, and my passion is software, and we spun out a startup company from it. I was one of the first 5 people to join that company back in the day, and look, honestly, it was an awesome journey. We went from startup, we developed new solutions to market, and grew from our revenues from kind of 0 to hero, listed on the New Zealand Stock Exchange. We expanded regionally, and it was just a crazy kind of 4 or so years, and 4.5, I think maybe even 5 in total. But look, it was incredible. But sadly, the company, it ended up in administration, and it was like someone had died. You put your life into creating and developing something that's amazing, and for it to then fail. So, and you look at it, I look back and I think, some of the best leaders, have failed a startup or 2, and I think they learn from those experiences, right? But look, I remember the wake. I mean, we had a wake. We got told on Monday morning, and the wake was on that afternoon, and that we'd found out in the morning, and I was late turning up to it because I was making sure that all my customers were looked after, and we had a plan in place to communicate the changes and what was going on and that kind of thing. But the rest of my team they were all in the pub drowning their sorrows, and then when I turned up, there'd been a few beers down, and then I turned up and just burst into tears, and we all had tears. We had anger, we had disappointment, we went through the whole grieving process, right? And I found that it was actually a really bonding, it was a real bonding experience for us. And I guess over the coming weeks, it was, we were each going through our grieving process at different times and different speeds. And I, knew what I was going through and thought, well, gosh, if everyone else is going through it, then we need to kind of make sure that we're there together and need to talk about it and help each other, get through it. So I'd organise these regular catch-ups for the next 6 months or so, and it was kind of almost like a support group, really. And we all met to coach each other and provide support and provide, networking opportunities and help each other find new roles. And some of the guys were starting out on their own, just doing contracting and consulting, and others were going into new companies or larger companies. And, we all found roles, which was fantastic. And since then, we've gone onwards and upwards. So, massive learning experience and something that I'll never forget. But it's pulling together with the team and supporting each other when you're going through something like that. It's pretty.
Thank you so much for talking about that, because I don't think we talk about our failures enough, but they happen all the time, right? Like all the time. And just sort of hearing how you supported each other, and then, in terms of networking and getting each other into different roles, or, where people ended up. I think that's really important to do. So thank you so much. So this year I attended your Leaders Forum with Palo Alto. So amazing event. You brought together a really stellar lineup of speakers, international ones like Stan Slapp, and then also you had John Key. And it was really around exploring the possibility of leadership and developing, nurturing, and maintaining culture. that allows a company to survive. And I just thought it was so on point in terms of what, we're going through globally in terms of, businesses coming through COVID, and then the importance of culture and people. And there was a lot of really good advice that came out of that. But I was keen to understand what you thought your kind of golden nuggets were from that leadership forum, which you actually spoke at as well. But was there a couple of really good points that you were just like, yes, I'm going to take that and use that?
Yeah, so look, gosh, there were so many. It's hard to think of the key ones, but I guess the theme of the Leadership Forum was about, creating a better culture, and is it a leadership responsibility? And just to take a little bit of a step back, the Leadership Forums the Leadership Series is the Leadership Forum is part of a NextGen leadership series of events that we hold during the year, and these are a bunch of marquee style events that were first run in 2019, I think, and it's the brainchild of John Walters, and he's our group CEO. And established it as a way of NextGen giving back to its channel community, and I think that's really important in itself. And the Leadership Forum as an event in its own right, it's normally in person. It's normally attended by over 500 people. It's normally in Sydney because traditionally, NextGen, having established in Australia, had the Leadership Forum out of Sydney. So, but we've now obviously got NextGen New Zealand. It's been around for close to 10 years now, and we branched into Asia. So we didn't hold it last year due to COVID, but this year it's the first time we've actually run it completely digitally and across all three regions. So we were bringing in Auckland, bringing in Singapore, and speakers from out of Australia as well, and not to mention Nancy, I think, was over in Europe, and she was heading off skiing that day, and Stan was out of the US. So it was hugely successful for a digital event, for sure. And look, we were super privileged to have Sir John Key as one of our keynotes. So thanks to our sponsorship and partnership with Palo Alto, but we also had other sponsors as well. But the whole point of getting our sponsors involved is to help them provide the ability for us to create these events and give back. So leadership is super important to John, having spent a lot of his life in the Australian Army, and so having presenters like Stan and Nancy Rademacher, Sir David Morrison, and Sir John Key was just incredible. And I think if I look at each of them individually, I suppose the Stan Slatt's fascinating keynote, around the definition of culture, and understanding it as a thing that needs feeding. I mean, I'd never ever considered that. It's like, what? And his point around, which I think is really important, is recognizing, the divide between leadership culture and employee culture. And as a leader, regardless of, if you're really friendly and get on with your team, regardless, you'll never be part of the employee culture. But knowing what you can do to understand that employee culture is super key, and really important to understanding that, and that will help you kind of formulate your way forward in terms of ensuring that team kind of execute on the strategy and get on board with the strategy, that kind of thing. So David Morrison was pretty awesome as well. They were all awesome, don't get me wrong, but he is ex-chief of army for the Australian Army, right? And his key thing from memory was more around, if senior leaders are going to make a difference in an organisation, in order to raise the bar on performance and get better outcomes, then they really need to convince the team that it's best for them, not just for the company or the organisation. And the other big thing as part of that, he said, is leaders standing next to the big problems. He had an incredible story. When he first stepped into his role as the Chief of the Australian Army, I won't go into details about the story, but it's online. You can find it on a YouTube channel. But it meant that he had to stand next to what was one of the biggest problems in his whole army career. And you think back to his entire army career and you're like, gosh, he fought wars and everything. But this was one of the biggest problems he'd ever had to face. And that's regarding the behaviour of some of his team in the Defence Force Academy. So he had stand next to that big problem and work through it and resolve it. And behaviours are a super relevant thing as well, because that sort of brings me on to Nancy Rainmaker, and another fantastic keynote. She spoke about a values-based culture and behaviours that support those values, as well as those that don't support those values. And I completely aligned with that. It's something I've been focused on with NextGen New Zealand over the last 12 to 18 months. And here in New Zealand, we're part of the bigger NextGen group of companies, and where we have the group values to which we align. But we didn't really have, when I started, we didn't really have a New Zealand specific identity of our own. And so I've gone about creating this with my team and understanding what's important to them. And it's based on values and behaviours that we personally align with. And at the end of the day, that's kind of needed from my perspective to deliver on the strategy, and that was kind of reiterated with our keynote speakers. But these mean that they apply internally and externally as well, when we interact with anyone who we work with in our channel community. But the thing that I like about a values-based culture means that you can also, call out those zero tolerance, or what we call below the line behaviours that are absolutely unacceptable in the workplace either. And you can call them out internally with the team. You can call them out externally if you're experiencing that with your customers or business partners. It really gives you that ability to have a voice and to say, hey, I was in this meeting and these are the behaviours I experienced, and this is, I want to let you know that this is what's happened, and and then we can really take action and address that. But I loved Nancy's analogy. It was that culture is like a glass of wine that everyone will drink from, and the quality of the wine's important. Everyone pours something into it. A few drops of something bad can make the wine go bad. And if we tolerate bad behaviour or toxic behaviours, it'll turn our culture toxic. So, her advice was keeping the glass filled with good quality wine is everyone's responsibility. So I totally aligned with that, and that was really, I absolutely loved that analogy. And then, so look, we wrapped up with Sir John Key, and he had a great fireside chat and lots of snippets in there for sure. I mean, he spoke about a lot of different things, and it was fantastic to hear. And I guess the one that stood out for me really, and having grown up from a very sporting background, is that to recognise as a leader, and this is dating back to years when I was head girl or I was team captain or something of the sports team, that as a leader, you'll do better when you have good people around you, and it's something that Sir John Key shared, and I totally align with that too, because it's all about the team for me.
Absolutely. And I think something else he said was with leadership and culture, like, don't overcomplicate it, which I thought was quite good as well, because at the end of the day, they're just human behaviours, aren't they? But we need to focus on culture and review it every so often and make sure it's on track, but don't try and make it too overcomplicated. So it was a brilliant forum. So lots of nuggets there, and thank you for sharing yours as well. Which kind of leads us on to a bit of a discussion around hybrid work, really. Like, this is kind of where this has all come from, because it's kind of leadership in this new hybrid age where you can't necessarily see all your employees and be around them the whole time. So every experience at work now needs to be hybrid. So how's NextGen trying to get their head around that? How are you approaching hybrid work, and what kind of things are you thinking about as a business?
Yeah, so look, I think, COVID's been, for one thing, COVID's been beneficial to actually prove that we can all work productively at home. I guess in our line of business with distribution services being core to our business at NextGen, that relationships are super important. And so that, at the end of lockdown, we really, really missed the whole face-to-face contact.
Yeah.
So because we're all about relationships and meeting people and having coffees and that kind of thing, and making sure we build those relationships to the extent that we need them. And but look, we have an office in Auckland that we only moved into just a little over a year ago. I think it's about March last year. It's an absolutely fantastic space. I'm in it now. I don't know if you can see what you can see in the background, but we just love it. It's a space designed for collaboration with our channel community. We've got kind of an open area that we can have events at. We've got an open area downstairs that we can have larger events at, and we've got some meeting rooms where we can have workshops with partners and vendors or end customers, sort of whenever they require it. And look, we get so many positive comments when we have people to come to visit that, my Auckland team, between us, we're all back at work, and we're all back in our office here in Auckland, and it's pretty much the same in the rest of our regions out of Sydney and Singapore as well. And but it's not so much working in the office from 8:30 till 5 anymore at all. It's using the office as a base, from which we can come and go, and use as a base from getting to meetings or having meetings here, that people that might want to come over to Parnell and that kind of thing. So we have a flexible working policy, and we respect people's needs to come and go, or to work from home when they need to, or to have virtual meetings, or to do training and to get some quiet time. We also respect travel times outside of peak hour as well. So I've got one of my guys lives south of Auckland, and so for him to get in early in the morning, it's quite difficult, but he might come in at 10 or 10:30 once the traffic's died down. It's super quick for him at that time of the morning, and then stay on a bit later to avoid traffic at the other end of the day. So we're pretty flexible, and we all know that we can work and be productive from anywhere. And interestingly, one of my jobs working for a software company in London back in 2004 was actually selling software, this little client that sat on your laptop that connected to Wi-Fi and set up all the security, to enable you to connect to your work network from anywhere wherever you are traveling, or you might be in the pub and need to connect on. That's 18 years ago that technology was had sort of started out, and for years before that as well. So I've always been quite open to flexible working and just generally a flexible working environment that ensures that it works for everyone where we can. But generally, I think we're more of a more in the office type of team than at home, only because we are a small team, and in New Zealand anyway, certainly in the Auckland team, there's close to 10 of us now, but it's a small team really, and even if you have half of them away, it's pretty quiet, and we have the music playing and stuff, but to keep the vibe going. But I think whenever and people miss each other as well. I think they like to catch up and chew the fat, and that sort of water cooler conversation that people talk about that we missed during lockdown. So so that's pretty much where we're at.
Excellent. So as we're kind of finishing up here, Lynne, so do you have any sort of final words or call to action for any of the listeners out there? Is there anything you'd like to leave us with before we say goodbye?
So look, I think as a leader, it's important to be human. and to remember to be human. I think 3 things that actually really resonate with me is continuous communication. I think people think I probably over communicate, but one of my friends called me a WYSIWYG 25 or 30 years ago, and I was like, what do you mean? She's like, WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get. It's like, okay. It's continuous communication, I think, is key, and certainly for me, being endlessly curious, asking why, learning from other people's perspectives and experiences, and I'm always open to input from my team as well. And so, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think? Or this is the problem. What do you guys think? How should we solve that? And I think being courageous is and backing yourself is key. Certainly from my experience and what I've had going on. But at the end of the day, it's recognizing and respecting your team. I'm nothing without the great team that I've got on board, right? So, and I want them to be on board with the journey, be brought into the journey, be passionate about the journey that we're on, and and be really, really positive. And look, when things don't go well, because there will be times when things won't go well, you just look at those opportunities that could come out of that situation, and how you can learn from that.